pastor. I'm Pastor John Woodin, and this is a ministry of Hollywood Faith Christian Center in beautiful Hollywood, Florida, on the Gold Coast. Well, we wish you a Merry Christmas. This is being Christmas week, and that you'll be blessed with all your family and your friends during the season. This morning we're starting in Acts chapter 10, verse 34. Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him." Well, he's at the house of Cornelius, who is a Roman centurion, and Peter, remember previously Peter had a vision of that animals coming down, and a sheet was rolled out, and there were all these animals, and it said in a voice, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." And he says, "Lord, I've never violated the laws versus the diet, so the dietary laws. I've never violated it." And he certainly didn't understand until he gets to the house of Cornelius, and that basically God was saying, don't call unclean what God has cleansed, you must not call common. So that he's opening the door for the Gentiles to come to Christ. It's not about becoming a Jew first, it's becoming just a believer in Jesus Christ. In Romans chapter 2 it says, "For there is no partiality with God." What does that mean? That means that God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't pick one over the other. Everyone is equally blessed, equally gifted, equally loved. And and that is amazing. Sometimes we like to think that, Peter said it like it's a man looking in a mirror. Paul said it's like a man looking in a mirror and immediately forgets what he looks like. Well, we don't want to be that way, because sometimes you can be like, look at me, I've got my salvation and I'm really moving forward in the Lord and in ministry. Too bad about those poor people who are, barely getting by and are struggling. And we want to remember that we too once were struggling along. For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, are law to themselves. So in other words, Gentiles, the door is open to non-believers, to non-Jews, to becoming Christians. 1 Corinthians 1, Paul writes, "For you see your calling, brethren, not that many wise according to the flesh, nor many mighty, not many noble are called, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty." Well, I love this because there's a story about the great John Wesley. Wesley used to ordain lay ministers, and that was very controversial for the 1700s, because most people believed that to be a minister, you had to go to seminary. Well, Wesley would meet someone, felt that they were anointed or for leadership. He would set them in place as a pastor or a leader and move on. Well, one day he commissioned a man, and he began the scripture on that God was an austere man. Well, he didn't know what austere meant, which meant hard or demanding. So he said he was an oyster man. And he began to preach about being an oyster man. Well, at the end of the sermon, 12 people gave their heart to Jesus. But some people went to Wesley and complained and said, "Look, this man doesn't understand the scripture. He doesn't understand the words." And Wesley's comment was, well, there are 12 pearls now been added to the kingdom. And so in other words, I don't know how he got to where he got to, but he got there, and there are salvations because of it. And I love this. In Luke chapter 18, we have the story, Jesus tells the parable of the publican and the Pharisee. The Pharisee is praying in the synagogue, and he's saying, stood and prayed thus. He said, God, thank you that I'm not like these other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, even as this tax collector. Can you imagine? He's pointing to this man and saying, not like this guy. Well, tax collectors, as you know, were considered thieves because they were collaborators with the Roman government. They would collect as much tax as Rome required, and whatever they could extort from you as a citizen, they got to keep for themselves. So they were generally not well regarded, and especially when they would be in the tax collecting booth guarded by Roman soldiers. So it really wasn't so. So here's this tax collector, and after telling about how he tithes and how he does all these things, and then Lord, you bless me and I'm great, and then he says that the tax collector merely says, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And Jesus said that's the prayer that God hears, not the haughty prayers of the high and lifted up, but those that are humble and weak. Jesus, in 1 Samuel, remembers the prophet Samuel is commissioned by the Lord to go anoint the next king over after Saul has messed up. And immediately Samuel goes to the oldest of Jesse's sons and tries to anoint him, and God said, that's not the one. And finally, he goes through all of Jesse's sons and finally says, do you have any others? And he says, yeah, only the little one, out in the sheep field. And God says this, but to the Lord said to the prophet Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Wow. The Lord looks at the heart. So the next time you're feeling that you've finally made it, don't think that. Be thankful that God has brought you as far as he has from where you were. God